Hello out there. This is Coach EJ, the brand.
And Coach Aaron, the source. All right, riddle me this, EJ. When should your kid start weight training? Or is weight training good for your kid? Or does weight training stunt your growth? All of those questions seem to be a hot topic, at least for me, in this last couple of weeks. I've had this conversation probably with at least three different parents on three different occasions. So I think that's something we should cover. Give my 2 cents on it, and you can give your 5 cents on it, and let's see what happens. So,
Yeah, I think it's a good subject because it comes up all the time. Like, people use this word, coaches use these words out there and then they get brought back to you and I. That coach didn't like my kid because he wasn't physical enough. He wasn't big enough. They only take the big, strong kids. He didn't have the physicality. We need to lift some weights. We
yeah.
need to get stronger. Your kid's 10. Come on, really? That kid's just growing faster than your kid. Just relax a little bit here. Or oh man, he's just not strong enough. And I was a late bloomer growing up, and I was like, I didn't really grow till I was like a junior in high school. And then they say, well, I don't understand my kid. He's not growing yet. I don't see he's not strong enough yet. Well, hello, you were a late bloomer, hereditary. Hello.
Yeah.
People don't realize these things play a major factor in the physicality of athletes. And that leads us into this question of when should they be weightlifting or should they not? Or what's it about? Will it stunt their growth? All that stuff. There are so many directions we can go with this thing, Aaron. And, you being the expert of sports performance in all the years you've been doing this, over 30 years, what's your take on this weightlifting thing? Because you have so many athletes that I see come into game speed at all ages, and I see what you do with them, and I watch you, man. You're like this artist, man, molding these guys, man. It's like you got this painting and you're painting it, and people don't get it, man. They don't get it, so you're really good at identifying what the athletes need to do in correspondence with their sport too. See, that's a whole, it's not just lifting to lift. It's what you doing in your sports. It's called sports performance. So what's your take on that, man? I got so many things I could probably shoot off you.
Well, yeah, and that's kind of the issue, is that there's so much of this stuff kind of gets cobbled together. Let me kind of try and maybe start this way and organizing my thoughts. You mentioned physicality, which was something I was going to talk about, because that's a term now that's used a lot, and I use it. And I think sometimes we got to really understand the definitions behind these things, because some of them kind of get cobbled together. And strength is synonymous with weights, and
Right.
physicality is synonymous with strength training. And I think I kind of parse them out a little bit more. And so first, because you hear the term physicality, I want to talk about that first.
Okay.
In my definition, physicality is being used a lot now, and I think it's an appropriate description for a lot of kids. And when I say a kid needs more physicality, basically what I'm talking about is there's a lack of direction in their movements. In other words, their movements are weak or not necessarily sound in terms of their force production and their stability when they land or when they run. There's always some kind of wobbling or imbalance or lack of coordination, or what I call leakage. Movements aren't direct and steady and forceful. Another part of that, I will say, there's a lack of physicality in how they just use their bodies. In other words, the willingness to present their bodies in doing something, whether it's contact, whether it's swinging a bat, whether it's jumping or running. They're not fully investing their body and putting it out there into the activity. They're kind of holding back. So
Okay.
those are kind of two things when I see a kid you know, there, you know, when I say there's a lack of physicality, you know, I hate to say it, but I always kind of think of sometimes, I don't know if you ever saw the book, I think it's Diary of a Wimpy Kid, and it has like a little stick figure kid. You know,
Yeah.
there's not the physical presence. You know, they're not projecting the physical presence that you need in sports. You know, there's a
Yeah.
way to hold that athletes hold themselves. There's a way
Right.
that athletes walk and talk and move and posture. That's
Right.
all physicality, you know. So just kind of from a holistic sense, it's,
Okay.
you know, how does this kid present as an athlete? You
Mm,
know, and when you're looking at those things, I'm not talking about is he the strongest kid? I'm not talking about, you know, is he the fastest kid? I'm not talking about is he the biggest kid, but when your kid moves, are they moving with authority?
mm. I have a question for you. Is when you say in you use these terms too, are you talking about the organization of the body?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it all comes down to that. So that's what I'm
Yeah.
saying. You can put balance in there, you can put coordination. There's all sorts of things. So it's not just a strength issue when you're talking about physicality.
I'm glad you said that because it's a misnomer with a lot of parents and coaches that just use the word but don't have a clear definition of what physicality is all about in athletics. And I think you defined it there so well about what physicality means because I have players that are 155 pounds and pound for pound great physical athlete that can hit the ball out of the ballpark. They're 5'9", 155, and hit like they're 6'4", 240.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
because they're they have what you just demonstrated and talked about physicality, the correct definition of physicality.
Yeah, I mean, I've had kids, you know, kids who are big for their age come in and they move like they're kids half their size.
Right.
You know, they don't own their physicality. So it's not about just your stature. It's about all those other things. Now, you know, putting physicality on the shelf, you know, the first thing that parents will say then, okay, do we need to lift weights? It's like,
Right.
no. And that's what I want to talk about next. Weight training is only one way of building strength. It's a modality, okay? It's a method. There's all different types of ways to build strength. And there's medicine ball training, there's kettlebell training, there's banding, there's body weight training, you know, manual resistance training. So there's all different sorts of methods to build strength in the body. It's not just weight training, but what ends up happening is, you know, parents say, oh, weight training, oh, no, you're going to stunt my kid's growth and da-da-da. What you do, the key to resistance training, which is really what all of that falls under, is finding the right methodology for where your kid is at in their developmental age. And that's both physically and mentally. Okay. Because you can't necessarily have a kid, even though physically they can do weight training, if they don't have the mental capacity to do their movements properly, to focus, all those sorts of things, then they're not ready for weight training. You know, you may have, so in other words, we talk about the gym IQ, you know, sometimes you have to get that gym IQ up before an athlete can do certain things.
Right.
So that's one part of it. You know, the biggest thing is just when you take a kid and you're talking about, you know, resistance training, you want to say, okay, where are they at with their coordination, their balance, body control, lowering left from right, being in sync, posture, all of those things. Then you want to say, okay, what's their musculature at this point, you know, in terms of their physical development? What's the appropriate loads that we can put on that type of body?
Right.
And, you know, so maybe an 8-year-old might be, hey, we'll start off with some body weight exercises. So we are going to do some lunges and some squats and some push-ups and some pull-ups. So that way you can build that strength, not muscle, because you're not going to build muscle on an 8-year-old or a 9-year-old, but you can build that strength and that directness of movement and that proper force production and stability and posture and all those things that are going to know what look like strength when they finally put it together. One of the biggest things that happens when an athlete comes to me, especially baseball players and softball players, and they come to me, say, Aaron, I want to get faster. Okay. So we do a speed training program. And before they even mention to me that they've gotten faster, I always hear, man, my kid's hitting the ball a lot harder now. They're throwing the ball a lot harder now. And it's because they haven't gotten stronger, because we didn't do weight training to get them faster. But what we did was we taught them how to organize their bodies more efficiently. And we taught them and we developed them the body in a way that they are now getting more force production. It manifests itself, and from the outside, it looks like, oh, they've gotten stronger, but we haven't put a pound of muscle on them. No. But what we've done is we've filled up those holes, so now there's not leakage in what they're doing. And so again, strength, what we call strength can manifest itself in a lot of different ways and be developed in a lot of different ways without touching any kind of weight, without adding any muscle to the body.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, when they hear about, I've got to weight lift, someone told them they have to gain some weight. I mean, the first thing that, I hear, like, he's got to gain some weight. And I think that's such an old school mentality thing. Like, he needs to put 15 pounds on so he could get stronger.
Right.
What?
Yeah. Why don't you
go eat then?
Yeah. What should be said is we need him to get stronger so that he can do X. Right. That should be what the request should be. But everyone always thinks, okay, well, because if he's bigger, he's going to be stronger. That's not necessarily the case. And yeah, you could get bigger and you could get stronger, but then now you can get tighter and you can get slower. And most sports demand speed and power, which is explosiveness. So if you get bigger and you get slower and get tighter, you've defeated the purpose.
Right.
So you've got to kind of read between the lines, because again, a lot of coaches use that kind of that terminology. Yeah, we need them to put on 15 more pounds. Well, why? Unless it's a contact sport, why? I 15 pounds. How do you want that 15 pounds to show in his play? That's what you want to ask them. And then that's what you give them. Yeah.
I want to use this as a good example. I look at Mookie Betts, Aaron. And Betts is 5'8.5", 5'9", 170 dripping wet. I'm going to tell you that right now. He's not very big. Jose Altuve, guys aren't very big. I look at Trey Turner, who's very lean and very fast and very athletic, very strong, hit 30 home runs last year. But I look at Mookie Betts, man, 30 home runs again last year, all those stolen bases. He's not a giant, man. No. But his organization of his body and the strength that he has, man, I think you couldn't have explained it any better about, being strong, pound for pound. I love boxers when they say that. Here's the heavyweight champion of the world, pound for pound, the strongest man. They talk about, a lot of people like that. These boxers, and the boxers like 160, 155, 145, and they're talking about pound for pound, the strongest, the most forceful punch and the quickest. And you talk about this explosiveness that I think gets left behind in sports. Every sport's explosive. I don't care what anybody says. When you're going to do something explosive, do something rapid, quick, and there's all that stuff, force involved, it's explosive, Aaron. And I don't buy that thing where the coaches say he's not physical enough, he's not big enough. That right there tells you that that's right out the door with those kind of athletes.
Yeah. Those terms, terminology is so generic, it's not really helpful. That's why I'm a little prejudiced, but I think people who are trainers who have come up in the sport of track and field are probably the best performance trainers, because our whole thing is, how can we put a pound of dynamite in, a 16-ounce shot glass? We're not trying to make our athletes bigger per se. We're trying to make them more explosive, more dynamic. And it's kind of like, taking a 4-cylinder car or 4-cylinder engine out of a Volkswagen and putting an 8-cylinder engine in the Volkswagen,
Right.
and so we're talking about building a more powerful and better engine, not a bigger engine, because it defeats the purpose if we put an 8-cylinder engine into a bigger car. For most intents and purposes, what we're trying to do is maximize the potential of the athlete without necessarily trying to go the route of making an athlete bigger. For sprinters, it's a perfect example. But again, you don't want to get caught up in the whole, weights are bad, because weights aren't bad. It's the application that is usually is usually when people get into trouble. And so, a coach will say to a parent, "Oh, your kid needs to get stronger." So ding, the parents say, "Okay, he's got to lift weights. Okay, I'll take him to CrossFit, or I'll take him, or I'll do, this weight training regime that we see posted from UCLA or something." You have to match the athlete with the methodology. And so you have to say, again, like I talked about earlier, where's the athlete at in his chronological age, his developmental age, his mental age, and what's most appropriate. And there's no rush to get there. Sometimes the only thing you can do is wait for Mother Nature.
Yeah.
But there's things along the way that you can teach them about their motor skills, their coordination, their balance, that you can maximize. So when their body is ready to put on muscle, now you've got the best of both worlds. You got all things working for you, because you can put muscle on a kid, when they're, at certain times, but it doesn't mean they're going to get stronger. It's kind of like, we had the client who, had his kid doing dumbbell curls all the time because he thought it was going to help his kitty,
Right.
Like, well, those muscles are involved in hitting, but they're not the determining, muscles in whether or not you're going to have a powerful swing. So, there's a lot of, again, misinformation out there that, parents have to weed through, but they should ask, they ask coaches if you can always say, "Hey, do you think my kid is ready for resistance training?" But most people say weight training. And,
Right.
have a conversation about, okay, well, what do you think you'd want to do with them? And then if it makes sense to you, great. If it doesn't, then, that's your philosophy. But it kind of, bothers me when a parent will say, "Oh, I don't want my kid to do any weight training," but yet your kid is on 3 travel soccer teams. They're practicing 6 days a week. And, what's worse for that kid? All of that playing and traveling, most injuries for most kids, younger ages, are what? Repetitive stress injuries.
Repetitive.
So you're going to tell me you don't want your kid to lift weights or do resistance training, but you're going to have them pitch 2 games back to back on a weekend. And you're not going to tell the coach no after that first day that your kid can't pitch.
Doctors tell me that.
What's the logic in that? I think people are selective in their boogeymen,
Oh, right.
Oh no, not the big bad weights. No, you don't want to, well, you know what? My kid just, pitched 16 innings over this weekend. It's like, what? Who's putting the kid at risk? And if you're going to do that, then it behooves you to do the strength and resistance training that's going to allow your kid to be able to handle that type of load.
Right.
So if you're going to put your kid on 2 or 3 different teams and they're going to play and practice 6, 7 days out of the week, then you should be doing the work so that their body can handle that. Because it's not a matter if, but when.
Ooh, the if but when statement comes out. I love it. You know,
I like that one.
I know you do, man. And what I love about your place is this. People come in, I have clients that don't work out the game speed, but they come in and go, what is that? I go, that's how you train an athlete. Your kid's an athlete, and it's not about weights. You have so many different modalities and so many things going on in there that help the overall organization and strength of the body, that people just don't go in and go, oh, look at the weights. Well, what's that strange thing over there? Why are these cones set up to this computer? Why does he have this strange like running thing? Why does he have the athletes run in between their circuits? And I'm like going, that's how you train an athlete, don't you? You know, I mean, what do you think about? I mean, this is called an athletic performance center. It's not called, here's a weightlifting place or
Right.
There's a such and such place. It's a sports performance, I'm going to say, institute. That's what it is. It's to help athletes get better. And I always laugh when people talk about weightlifting, like, hey, weightlifting is bad, or it's the only thing you should be doing. So, you know, I think you explained to people today, Aaron, about the true fallacies and then the truth behind strength training and weightlifting and what it really means.
Yeah. No, I just think that, you know, and one of the biggest things that I see with kids nowadays is, we'll go back to the beginning of our podcast.
Okay.
There is a lack of physicality with a lot of kids. It's a growing issue. And I think a lot of that just comes from, you know, the structure that athletes find themselves in now. You know, it's more about technical training and teaching and that sort of thing. The lack of play that athletes do on their own.
Right.
The lack of physical education in schools. We've talked about all this stuff before.
Yes.
That has now presented us with a different type of athlete. And so how do we infuse those things that, you know, our generation got from a more natural, you know, side of things.
Right.
And so to just sort of just, you know, clutch your pearls and say, oh no, weight training gonna stunt the growth, we're gonna da. No, you need to keep an open mind. Say, okay, maybe my kid's not ready for weights, but what resistance training method can they participate in that's going to help them continue to develop as an athlete?
I love that. With that said, see this Sharpie right here is my mic. Watch this. It just got dropped. Hey, that concludes our podcast today with our little Sharpie mic drop there, Aaron. This is Coach EJ, the brand.
Coach Aaron, the source. We'll see you.